The following program deals with a controversial
subject.
The theories expressed are not the only possible interpretation.
The viewer is invited to make a judgment based on all available information.
the top talents in the comic book business are here to tell everything they know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another Tuesday night for episode 37 of the Industry of Comics show. I am joined by my compadres. 37
in a row.
Boy.
It's a Clerks
Well,
reference.
for you guys.
I know.
For you
I
guys,
messed it up
have
last
one
year,
spot.
but last week was 36, so you can give me shit for it. Anyways, Jesse from Jesse James Comics and Dennis from Wonder World Comics. We have been doing this for a decent amount of time now, and there has always been one guy that we have
Hold on. Before we get into that, Brian, I have to address the audience.
Okay, go for it. I know what you want to talk about. Go for it.
Okay, the most important thing is coming up in the next week, and I need everyone out there to do their civic duty.
I'm looking for any snipers. I'm looking for snipers.
The most important election of our time is this year. Early voting starts tomorrow. So when you go into your comic shops on Wednesday, I need you to make sure you cast your vote for me and only me for president of the comic book industry. President of the comic book industry is one of the most important votes of your lifetime. If you want the next year to be Dennis Barger as the president of the comic industry, you must make your decisions starting tomorrow. We'll have the announcement of who the winner is next week. It's the only election that's important right now. So, right. Dennis Barger, president of the comic book industry. My running mate is Billy Tucci. Billy Tucci, vice president of the comic book industry. Cast your vote tomorrow. Barger and Tucci. There, I've said it.
2024. Thank you, sir.
2024.
Thank you, sir. All right. That being said, luckily no shots were taken yet. There's always been one person that since day one we've said, hey, we want to try and get this guy on. And Jesse, God love him. We've been trying to get him on. Jesse just doesn't check his email good enough or something,
The 1 week I don't check my email, it's but it is true. When we did our guest list and we said who are 5 people that we would love to have on, he was on that list. And sometimes not getting them on directly at the beginning allows us to grow. We've grown over 36 shows. We've learned a lot of stuff. So I think we're better positioned. Not that we weren't when Liefeld was on and all that, but I think it turns out good in the end. He's done keep in mind, this guy has done keynote speaking. If you're called as a keynote speaker in any business, not just in the comic book industry, that's a big achievement.
Well, and I want to add something to that. So it was important for me to have Filip on here from the beginning. And it really gave the audience a chance to hear, 4, maybe 5 different times from one of our guests on this show, the almost 50 guests that we've had. He's been name dropped, not prompted or anything. And then I was talking to Filip, and all of a sudden, I decided to make this giant change in my life, and I went in a different direction. John Tyler Christopher, swears by Filip. And then on top of that, just like what Jesse was saying, I can count on one hand the amount of keynote speakers at retailer summits that have completely moved me as a retailer, and Filip's given 2 of them.
Yeah. Yep. Amen. Well, out of the 5 original guests that we wrote down, this is the final one. Ladies and gentlemen, join us, Filip Sablik. I messed it up. Sablik.
I wasn't going to say anything. I'm like, well, we'll see his reaction there.
I told Filip behind the stage that I don't want to mess up names, and I mess it up the first time, but don't worry. It's Sablik, ladies and gentlemen.
You caught yourself. You did great, Brian. You nailed it. Now you guys gave me so much material in that intro. I don't know what to respond to first. I think we're all Gen X dudes here, so my first reaction is like, oh man, that was way too many compliments. Somebody please make fun of me so that I can feel comfortable and know that you really like me.
Well, it is true, man. No, it is true. We wrote down a list of 5 names, and we kept on adding to the list, and we would keep on seeing your name there. And I would tell Jesse, hey, Jesse, what's going on? And Jesse finally comes to us and goes, you guys, it was my bad. It was my bad. I didn't see the damn email. So,
and then I would always message Philip, and then Philip would be like, yeah, I'm talking to Jesse. We're good. Yeah. And I'll be like, oh, okay, cool.
Well, and for a while, hopefully it's all a little bit more clear now. But when you first reached out, obviously there was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, and I was like, oh, you know what? I pride myself when I have conversations. Jesse, Dennis, we've known each other for a long time. That I'm always able to be a straight shooter with you, and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to be as direct as I want to be because of everything that was kind of transpiring at Boom while I was there, and then in this in between period where I wasn't quite ready to talk about what I was doing next. So hopefully good things come to those that wait.
Well, first of all, can we start out with a little background on you? Let's roll it all the way back. Tell us about your first comic book experience, and then talk about how you worked your way through this industry.
All right. Well, I'll try not to do the version that I do with my kids, which is the one that causes them to roll their eyes back and go like, "Dad, like, shut up, please. The story is taking forever." My first comic book experience. So I know that I read like Classics Illustrated and Archie comics, and I was picking up Garfield and Peanuts, compilations in the library. I was a voracious reader when I was younger, and my, family didn't have a ton of disposable income, so Mom was taking me to the library all the time. So whatever they had, fantasy, science fiction, prose, as well as like anything that they had in comics, and I think, as part of that, I did read like early Stan and Jack Marvel comics, those old compilations of like, here's the first few issues of the Incredible Hulk.
Bring on the bad guys.
Yeah. Right. And, but the comics that probably made the biggest impact was when I went into middle school. I met one of my oldest and closest friends, a guy named John Mahoney that, years later ended up being my co-writer on Last Mortal, which we put out through Top Cow. But he was the one that like got me into comics, and his gateway drug was Uncanny X-Men. And so this was like early 90s, Jim Lee, Mark Silvestri, the comic that like in my mind's eye is my first comic that I knew forwards and backwards and could like literally turn all 22 pages and see every panel on it in my head, was Uncanny X-Men 268, which is obviously a great kind of landmark standalone issue to get you hooked. So that was my path in. And
can I ask you a question on that?
Yeah.
How did you, when you mentioned the first books that you read, you're reading really non-superhero books. So was it the notion that you had gone from non-traditional superhero action hero books to all of a sudden superhero books? Was that a big explosion for you?
I think it was partially that, but in retrospect, I think it was the fact that it was my first taste of community as it connects to comic books, right? There was like a couple of friends that were as into it as I was, and we were trading and we were swapping and we were talking about the comics. So whereas before, reading was largely a solo pursuit for me as a kid. It was me alone in my bedroom, kind of going wild with my imagination. So I think that's what it was.
Okay.
Did you have a comic? You mentioned backstage about your local comic shop. What was that experience like you first being and seeing, getting into the local comic shop life and that community there?
Yeah, so again, it was the 90s. I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, which is a relatively small city in Southwest Virginia. I always joke when we had national maps, right? When you pulled out the atlas back in the day, or like fold out a map, Roanoke was always on the national map, and people would say, "Oh, I know Roanoke. I've seen that."
Right.
I'm like, "Yeah, what you don't understand is it's only on the map because there's nothing bigger than Roanoke within like 100
Sure.
miles, right?"
Right.
So like I think when I was growing up, it was maybe like 75, 80,000 people. It wasn't like a big city by any stretch of the imagination, and I, kind of grew up in a rural area, but because it was the early 90s, we had like 4 or 5 comic shops in the Roanoke Valley, right? And so the one that I bought most of my new comics from was called the Dusty Corner Bookstore, and it was a bookstore that had a sideline of comics, but I was 12, 13, 14 years old and kind of scraping together,
Right.
lawn mowing money and babysitting money to pay for my comics. And they got my business because they were given I forget, it was either 20 or 30% discount off of new comics, which, they're no longer selling comics. I don't know that they're in business any longer, but, 13, 14-year-old me really appreciated the ability to dive deep. And then the store that probably was the community store and really kind of cemented that for me was B&D Comics in Roanoke, and that was for years kind of like the quintessential comic book store. They had a really awesome location that was in a log, kind of like a log cabin style building, and you went in there and they had the best back issue selection. Like you could go in there and find anything, and it was a man and a woman that opened it. They were friends and business partners, and I think probably part of those early fandom days in the 60s and 70s, and they opened up this shop. I haven't checked if it survived the pandemic. I think it did, but I think at this point it may have transferred ownership. I think the original owners may have retired, but yeah, there they are.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's the type of stuff that I always love hearing about. Are the stories like that, about the little comic book stores, and every once in a while you go find them and you can find information on them. I think we all have those stories, and when we tell them, you could tell when people get excited and enjoy talking about that type of stuff, And when I hear anybody say it had the best back issue section, I instantly am like, okay, that's what I'm talking about. There's a good comic book store with a good back issue section. He knows what he's talking about, man.
Well, if you'll humor me, I'll tell you one little story about B&D specifically. So when I was in high school, or early high school, I was obsessed with drawing, and this will kind of transition into answering Dennis's question of how I got into comics as a professional. So, like I said, in middle school, I met my friend John, and as I think most kids do, once you become obsessed with something, at a certain point, you're like, well, we should do this ourselves, right? And so, being that we were in, I think, 6th or 7th grade, the way we figured out who was going to do what is we both drew like a superhero, kind of like copied a panel, and I was like, I don't know, 15% better, and he was like, you're the artist and I'm the writer, and I was like, okay, well, that's as good of a way to make that decision as any other.
Right.
And but it like I said, it turned into an obsession for me. So I was drawing constantly, and somewhere in kind of late middle school, early high school was the first time outside of the image creators that everybody in my generation was into, that I discovered like an artist that I, emulated and wanted to be like, and that was George Perez. And, just, I picked up, Fantagraphics used to do these spotlights on artists.
Yeah.
Jesse and Dennis, you probably have one of these in your, in your back issue stock, right? But there was a spotlight on George Perez, and the thing about that is, in addition to having interviews in the back, it had a checklist of everything George had done up until that point. And so that became the hunt, right? And I was just obsessed with trying to fill in every single issue. And I'm a kid, so I'm not really thinking. And so one, I think the year after I got that book, you know, my parents were like, well, make your Christmas list. I made the Christmas list up, and I literally put down on the Christmas list, I want to fill in the following back issues.
Right.
I need, you know, Teen Titans whatever, and I need
Right.
Avengers this, and I need Fantastic Four that. And my poor mother, who is the most amazing but tiny little like Eastern European woman, went into B&D comic shop with this list. And one of those two owners, God bless them, they went box by box with her and helped her fill in as many of those. And I got like 30 or 40 issues filled in. So that's both a story to say, like, I had amazing parents, and that store was amazing. Because I mean, like, you know, they were just like, okay, cool, let's go through the back issues, lady, and help you find this stuff for your kid. It was pretty
Shout
amazing.
out to JSS Brooklyn, who just made everybody think about that big fart noise that everybody heard. By the way, Philip, if you hear that fart noise, it means that somebody is thanking us by giving us a super chat. He says, thanks, Brian, and for arranging the show. Hey, these guys do as much here as I do, and I can't thank these guys enough, you know, for doing the show with me. So thanks to these guys too, but thank you, JSS. Appreciate you. Yeah. I those old Fantagraphic books, when I realized that those checklists were in there, I would go and search out those books to find those checklists, because these guys know I talk about it ad nauseum, but I'm a creator guy. I love to find lists of early creator works and those hidden books that you might not know about. And, you know, I keep those lists. And those were gold back then for that type of thing.
Yeah, and I think what you want to understand is we're not in the internet world during those days. So that's like your high tech. That is high tech. Our high tech was, we had two options or three options. You get on your bike, you go to LCS, you go to 7-Eleven, or you pick up the rotary phone, or if you had a phone, right? That was your three options. So as we generationally get more tech, this sounds so drastic, but for us, this was our tech.
Yeah. Yep. This was what we're doing right now was done at the comic shop. And unfortunately, you know, those comic shops are dwindling, and it's happening here more often, which, you know, we talk about quite often. But, you know, Philip even said it, you know, to have, like you said, a small place like Roanoke have 5 comic book shops back in the day. That was a totally different world than what we're living in now.
Yeah.
So, okay. So there was a question in the chat that I think is very interesting that Sequential Geek said, and you might be what you just mentioned, but he said, when did you start to not just read comics, but begin to dissect how the story works, how book intros, characters, you know, that type of stuff, how beginning, middle, and end setups in each books, that type of thing? Because I think that's a great question, because that kind of is the next step for somebody that wants to get into comics.
Yeah, I think it happened in parallel with my interest in wanting to create comic books, right? So first it was on the art side, looking at how panels were constructed and, like, you know, how does perspective work? How can you crop figures and lay out panels and lay out a page in an interesting way? You know, like most folks who first get into it, a lot of what I started doing was emulating. You know, the first kind of comics I did were literally like, oh, I'm going to take this panel from X-Force and this panel from X-Men,
Right.
and I'm going to, you know, redraw it kind of with my characters on it. But as you're doing that, you're learning, you know, what makes those panels work. I remember there was a period of time where, you know, me and some friends who were into art got just a stack of like really beat up old books at like yard sales, and we literally would take them, and at the time I think I was probably looking at like how to draw comics the Marvel way and a couple other instructions, and I want to say like Wizard magazine at that point had some instructional columns that Bart Sears was doing and a few other artists were doing. So we were looking at that. But I remember taking those beat up old comics and like taking a John Buscema Conan issue and literally drawing over to block out like, okay, here's how this figure is causing your eye to go into the next panel, and how this cropping is creating,
but
an interesting angle.
You've really got to have like a Neo from the Matrix way of looking at these things to be able to see that. I mean, as a young man, you had to be a next level thinking to be able to go, oh, wait, he's doing this to me. And then, and I get it from a lot of the creators that we talk to. They literally had a different way of looking at this stuff that you don't realize until after you're already on the other side of the looking glass.
Yeah, I think a lot of this stuff makes sense in retrospect, right? When you're in it, you're just trying to figure it out. And in retrospect, I think my when I was in school, in high school, my two other subjects that I was really good at and I liked were history and math. And part of, I think why that is those are subjects that once you understand principles and once you understand why something is happening, it sticks, right? If you're just trying to regurgitate it kind of goes in one ear and out the other. And so I was always kind of drawn to that. I saw the other question was about the DC guide to writing comics. I have a copy of that, but Denny O'Neil's book came out when I was already a working professional. So I have a copy. I've never read it, I have to confess.
Well, now you got to read it if you have it.
I'm like every other comic book collector and reader, right? I got a stack of stuff in the garage that have never cracked the spine off.
Yes.
An endless episode.
But I will one day.
Yeah.
An endless episode of the famous Twilight Zone where you're sitting there with time at last to read them, and then your glasses break.
Yeah.
So, Philip, before we get into 2000, when you get started, did you have any jobs before? Did you work at Hickory Farms? Did you work at a grocery store? Was there anything before 2000?
Yeah, I was again, I'm a first generation immigrant kid. So I was working from the moment it was legal to work, like summer jobs and just trying to make money. My parents didn't really buy into the idea of like an allowance. So it's like, if you wanted spending money, you had to do something. So I was probably 12 when I had my first like summer job was at the snack bar at the local pool, heating up hot dogs and
there you go.
Yeah, that was mine too.
Cashing out chips, bags of chips and bomb pops for the kids, right? Kids, I was a kid too, right?
Right.
And then it was lots of mowing lawns, I took I said yes to a lot of things that afterwards I was like, oh, I've undervalued my labor. like the neighbors going, hey, would you mind, coming over on Saturday and spreading some mulch and I'll like pay you $20 or like $30 for it. And then you get there and you realize like he's got half an acre and it's all like, on like a 90-degree incline, and you're out there in the sun sweating going like, oh man, I should have negotiated better
right
on this. So yeah, I was doing all that, and then once I started driving, and maybe even like right before that, but once I started driving, I got a job at a local pizza shop, and it was a pizza sub shop that was small enough where it was like two of us on shift. So you were cashier, short order cook, dishwasher, you cleaned the bathrooms,
you made the dough.
You made the dough, you did all of it. And then what was fun, so the place was called Jumbo's Pizza, and it was like a maybe like a 10-seat place that was mostly takeout and people come and picking up pizzas and subs and stuff. But the other side of the building, there was like a dividing wall, and there was a tiny little dive bar back there that only served beer. And it was called the Squeeze In because you literally had to squeeze in to like get to the chair.
Right.
And I think what it was they wanted to serve beer for the people that were buying pizzas, and they figured, well, if we're doing that, we may as well have a bar on the other side. And that was just like a fantastic. I mean, I'm a strong believer that everybody should work food service at some point. Like, like just to kind of learn all sides of customer service, to understand human behavior, like all of it. So yeah, I was probably serving beer before I was supposed to too, right? Because you had a couple regulars that would come in before the bar opened, and then it's like, oh, that's Jimmy. If Jimmy comes in and he wants a Bud Light, go get him a Bud Light. Even if we're not open yet. Okay.
I like the way you put that about working food, because and I talk about the thing about synchronicity with me all the time, but it's funny because my very first job was working at the snack shack because my dad coached Pop Warner, and I would go work at the snack shack when I was 12 years old. I mowed lawns too, and when I started driving, my first job was working at a pizza place, and the thing that I learned at a pizza place, it was the same type of thing, is I learned so much about how to treat people, especially people that make your food. And I to this day, I will, yes, sir, no, sir, oh, thank you, because I know what goes on, what hijinks can go on in a food place. And at the same time, you learn what goes into, putting all that stuff together. So, yeah, I agree with you. I was almost exactly the same as you when it comes to all that stuff.
Turns out Bryan and I are the same person.
There you go. And keep in mind, we're not talking about lawnmowers that self-do it.
No.
We're talking about blade lawnmowers.
Well, I'll tell you, there's one thing that Philip and I might have that you guys over there didn't have: shoveling snow.
Yes. Yeah.
And that was a very lucrative job, especially.
I'm from Las Vegas. I didn't even know what snow was.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. You guys missed out on a supply and demand economy, because when all the kids would wake up early and watch the little TV tag at the bottom if their school was closed. And the second it said your school was closed, every single kid in my neighborhood went right back to sleep. And I bundled up and grabbed my shovel, and that was like, all right, we're getting $10 a driveway. Let's do it.
And the race, Dennis, was to get those driveways shoveled before the plow came through.
Exactly.
And buried you.
Right?
Yeah. So you had to clear it before the plow, and then if they wanted you to clear the plow snow, that was another $10.
Yep, exactly.
Did you say in the pre-show that you tried to work at a comic book store?
Oh yeah.
Or were you okay?
Yeah, like I was in those comic shops all the time, so I was constantly asking, like, "Oh, are you hiring? Do you need anybody to bag and board? Can I drop off my resume?" Which basically had a bunch of nothing on it.
Right.
I mean, I wasn't the clean cut guy you see before you. I was, a shaggy haired, metal kid who, I don't know. And look, I also know that probably by the time I was looking for those jobs, it was like 95, 96. So my guess is, a lot of those stores were going through, the correction from like those early 90s boom days, and probably frankly couldn't have hired me even if they'd wanted me to. And I wasn't entrepreneurial enough to go, oh, can I bag and board in exchange for credit?
Right. Yeah.
So instead, the pizza shop got my services.
Yeah. When I started in '82, it was, we'll hire you. This is how you're getting paid. You get bag boards and comics, and hell yeah, right? Yeah.
And then in college, just because I see Dennis posted the full CV there of pre-comic Dennis. In college, I waited tables again, Cheesecake Factory, downtown Baltimore. That was a good way to make bank. Back in the day, because they used to have 3-hour lines on a Friday to get into that spot. I worked. I had a couple kind of I forget what they were called, but the first couple of years, you could get a loan, you could get scholarship or grant money, but then there was also kind of like a way you could get hours through the school, like answering phones in one of the offices or something like that. So I did that for a bit, worked the security desk at school, which you have to understand. I went to the Maryland Institute College of Art. That is not a closed campus. That is a city campus in a neighborhood. So there's security was actually security. I worked both the building. I had friends who were wandering security guards. We called those the rovers. I never did that. Did you do that?
I did campus security in Eastern Michigan. I had the big key ring with all the keys.
Yep. Well, and most of those, they had to go from building to building to unlock stuff. Sometimes they would have to walk somebody from one building to another, and they weren't, because they were students and they were not like professional security guards. They weren't supposed to, but every single one of the security guards had a retractable nightstick.
They wouldn't let us have weapons.
Brass knuckles.
Mace.
Yep, mace. Everybody was carrying something, but it had to be small enough to hide so that the administration wouldn't see you doing that. And then I, towards the end, I was a shuttle driver, right, from picking up kids and dropping kids off, because that was you made better money doing the shuttle. So I did that for a bit.
Institute of Art. Do you want to be a comic artist, or is is that the whole goal? Is that why you're going to that school? Wow.
Yeah. So I applied to SCAD, the Spanish College of Art and Design. I applied to the Pratt Institute, and I applied to the Maryland Institute College of Art. Did not apply to any 4-year colleges. I was like, it's art or nothing. As a matter of fact, senior year of high school, I was like, I don't need a math class anymore. I fulfilled all my requirements. I'm not going to be doing math in art school. And now I tell my kids, I do math every single day. Learn.
Yes.
Like that is a skill you will need for the rest of your life.
Yes.
I went in with the hope of becoming a professional comic book artist. That was the plan. And in fact, even when I got my first job, that was in comics. That was the plan. This was never the plan.
Wow.
Not for 16-year-old Filip Sablik in Roanoke, Virginia. This wasn't what he imagined.
So you get to year 2000. Let's get you to year 2000. That's your first rodeo in the comic book industry. How does that start? And did you already know who that company was before you went to it or applied?
So to set the stage, in 2000, I'm graduating from college. I'm graduating from the illustration program at MICA. And I've told this story a bunch, so I'll try to do the abbreviated version. But in art school, you don't have exams, you have critiques, you have a thesis project, and you throw your final pieces that you've been working on for months up on a wall, and basically everybody eviscerates them. Which, by the way, also highly recommend art school for anybody that wants to develop a thick skin. Because after 4 years of just having, you're bearing your soul, and then you have, a dozen people kind of pointing out all the things that don't work about it or how they're reacting to it. So I was sitting in this class in this final critique, and I looked around, and there was like 20 of us in this class, and I went, well, I'm nowhere near as good as those 5 to 7 people, and I think I'm better than those 5 to 7 people. And I went, oh no, I'm in the middle. Never good to be in the middle.
Right.
That's not a strong position.
No.
And by the way, one of the 5 to 7 people that were better than me in that class was Aaron Campbell, who is the artist of Infidel and Hellblazer now. So at least I had good taste. I understood what talent looked like. And kind of while I was in college, I also, with a couple other folks, started the first comic book and graphic novel club in MICA's history. And as part of that, we realized that there was this thing called mail order. And I think we were ordering from Mail Order Comics at the time. It might have been Westfield, but I think it was Mail Order Comics. And as part of that, I got my first previews catalog. And so, Jesse, to answer your question, it was like, oh, there is a distributor that produces this catalog that has everything in comics in it. And that's how you can order your comic books. And so I'm getting ready to graduate, and I'm realizing kind of in my mind, the fork in the road is I either build my portfolio, move up to New York, and spend, months, years walking around with my portfolio, living off of Kool-Aid and ramen, trying to get somebody to notice me, right? And because I was self-aware enough to know that I wasn't gonna get the job based purely on talent, the second option for me was like, go get a job. And so I started looking online. This was, early days of the internet, but there were websites, and I came across, I was looking for jobs in the Baltimore area, came across a customer service posting for Diamond Comic Distributors, which was at the time located in Timonium, Maryland. And I recognized Diamond from that previous catalog, and I went, oh, I didn't realize they were here. And then I thought, well, I've waited tables and I've worked security and I've done the pizza shop thing. I'm qualified for customer service and probably not much else with a BFA in illustration.
Yeah, because the worst customer at a restaurant couldn't be as bad as a comic retailer.
Yeah. Maybe so, maybe not. But yeah, so I applied for that job, and Bryan, to come back to something I think you were picking at, it was like that was, in my mind, me getting my foot in the door, and the plan was going to be start networking, get by on, hopefully my personality would make up for what my talent lacked. I felt like I had a pretty good way of working with people and communicating with people, and so I thought, well, if I can kind of get my foot in the door and build some relationships, maybe that will get me my first art job.
What was that job, and what did it entail?
So customer service in 2000 and 2001 was, we were just coming out of everything was done on the phone and fax. We were starting to get emails, but Diamond at the time still had a queue, like a 800. Dennis, Jesse, was it 800 number?
I think it was an 800 number,
right?
But the 800 number, little secret from back then, the 800 number puts you in a longer queue with the cheapskates. But if you had a cell phone with unlimited minutes, you could call the direct number to Baltimore, and it was a shorter queue because comic retailers are cheap bastards with like landlines and would want that 800 number, but I had unlimited minutes, so I would always call that other number.
Yeah, and you had a dedicated customer service rep, right? So yes, I was responsible for Washington State, Montana, kind of the Northeast, and then I had some accounts in California. I was on the West Coast team. Obviously, Montana had like a handful of accounts, right, and California needed a ton of reps because there's just a ton of stores there.
And let me give a huge shout out to our West Coast guy, Dave Hawksworth. Rest in peace. One of the best guys at Diamond ever.
Absolutely. Dave was an amazing, kind soul. And those of us who knew him were lucky to call him friend.
Yeah.
So yeah, it kind of consisted of, I had about 100 accounts that were on my list, and I specifically service. So if they had a problem, they could call me, email me, fax, shortages and damages in, and depending on, whether the store was an older store or newer store, they'd pick one of those channels, right? There were stores that never interacted with me directly. I only ever communicated with them through fax, right? And they would take out the physical order form, and they would write down what they wanted, and they would fax it in, and then I had to go manually enter those orders in.
So you worked there. Can I sidetrack us real quick? Because you were privy to a time and place that I really don't get a lot of details from, but you were perfectly positioned. Okay, so I always like to talk about moving the needle moments in the comic industry, paradigm shifts, innovation. What was it like the first time you heard Ultimate Spider-Man?
Well, the first time I heard it, everybody was like, why do this, right? And I think even within the company, and what you have to understand is at that time, because this was Ike owns Marvel, and Gemis and Casada are in charge, right? So because Ike owned it, prior to Ike, Diamond customer service would get a bunch of comp copies of all the Marvel and DC books so that the reps could read them and be familiar with them. By that time, Marvel was sending one set for the entire department. So there were like 40 customer service reps that all had to share. So on your lunch break, you were like, oh, can I grab that and read that?
Right.
It's like middle school days.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important to note too that because I was an art school kid, there was about a 3 or 4 year period there from 96 to 2000 where I wasn't buying new comics. I was just, rereading the stuff that I bought. Now, if you're going to miss a chunk of time in the comic book industry, that's not the worst one to miss out on.
Yeah.
Right.
But
A lot of spaghetti on a lot of walls.
not that there wasn't some great stuff, put out in those years, but the batting average wasn't exceptional.
Right.
I would argue. And so I was coming back in, and my gateways, Dennis, were the Ultimate Universe and Authority and Planetary and all this stuff that was happening at Wildstorm. And that was like, right?
Right, but I mean, there was a malaise to the industry prior to that lightning bolt that was Ultimate Spider-Man #1.
Yeah, I think
there is just a quick gap there. You gotta understand, Golden Age becomes Golden Age, right? Silver Age becomes Silver Age, so they're defined. So when you say this new energy comes out, well, that's generational. So this new generational is saying, I don't really care about Golden Age. I don't care about Silver Age. What do you have in my generation?
Yeah. And that, by the way, didn't used to be that unusual, right? Because for years, when comics were primarily aimed at younger readers, there was a new generation every 10, maybe 15 years, right? And so that's why you have, 3 or 4 different Flashes, is because, and I saw this happen with my younger brothers. My younger brother's 6 years younger than me. His Robin is Tim Drake.
Mm-hmm.
My Robin is, Dick Grayson. Jason Todd wasn't around long enough to, really make an impact. But that's, it was one of the interesting things when I was at Boom for a long time, was realizing, we can do a retrospective thing on Irredeemable because that book ended 10 years ago.
Right.
For an entire section of readership, that's their Kingdom Come. That's their Watchmen. That's their, the thing that, shifted the paradigm in their mind of what superhero comics could be. And we forget, I think, those of us that have been in this a long time, how quickly that can happen, right? Because I turn around and go 10 years, what do you mean? 1996 wasn't 15 years ago? How is that possible?
One of the things that I hear these guys specifically when they talk about you, and especially Boom and what happened with Boom, is how good you guys are at talking to the shop and your customer service within Boom and this and that. And it makes sense now because you literally had the best job to start the industry, to kind of shape you to be that type of person, being that customer service rep for all these stores and learning what it takes to run a store from that position. I don't think there's very few jobs that are as good as, working in a comic book store is great, but that's one of those.
I've said for years that just like working a food service job when you're a teenager is really great foundation for this industry, working at a distributor for a couple of years, and it's a 101 course in the business of comics.
It can't be said enough, though. Also, you were there right after the purge, from the 10,000 stores down to 2,500 or less.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of bleeding that was still happening when you came in.
Yeah, and in fact, when I was coming in, I was coming in at that one of those times where people were like, "What are you doing trying to get into comics?" comics. We're all trying to get out.
Yeah.
You know, and again, I had been out of it for 4 years, so my memories of comics were, you know, 90 to 96, which was like, you know, halcyon days. And Bryan, one thing you said that I wanted to just touch on is the thing that was amazing about that queue where people would call in is I got to talk to retailers from all over the country. And so like one of the things that taught me is I'm a kid from Southwest Virginia. We say ma'am and sir and please and thank you. And, you know, the nastiest thing you could say to somebody is bless their heart, you know?
Yeah.
And then I'm picking up and I've never been north of the Mason-Dixie line, right? So then I'm getting on the phone with retailers from Brooklyn and from Manhattan
That might
that
not
are
be
coming
happy.
into that phone line, coming in hot.
Yeah, exactly.
And what you realize after a while is that it's not personal, and they are not actually communicating in the same way you are. This is like baseline. This is how you survive, and this is how you talk in this part of the country. And
I think it started when you were there. While you were waiting, you didn't get the beautiful sounds of Muzak. You got the beautiful sounds of Nance Romer's voice reading Diamond's previews for that month. And it was at a certain point after like the 20-minute mark, you're like, God damn it, just play some, tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree and without words, you know. I've heard the same solicit 3 times.
And a lot of, look, I know you guys probably want to get to a bunch of other stuff, so I won't hang here too much longer, but, and I told this story on Dollar Bin Bandits podcast, so if anybody's curious, they can dig into that. But I told the story about training, because that's the other thing that is critical, is not just what the job is, but who are your mentors, who takes you under their wing. And that customer service job, I learned from the number 1 and the number 2 customer service rep in the entire department. A guy named Mark Squirick, who was a brilliant, passionate theater actor. That was what he was doing. This was the day gig for him, right? So he was incredibly connected with his customers, like very emotionally intelligent. And then the other guy that trained me was Cliff Lewis, who was a ex-military. You know, you remember Cliff, right? And
Cliff,
he was
the
buttoned up
instructor,
and polished and professional. And so, like, when you see like the DNA of how I behave professionally, it's that, right? It's like take
Cliff's
take
the
the
drill
strengths
instructor,
of
right?
both.
Yeah.
I don't remember whether he was a drill
Marine?
instructor or he was an MP, but he
Okay.
he was ex-military.
Yeah.
And like he came in and his shirts were starched.
Yeah.
And his desk
he
was
he
immaculate.
suffered no fools, Cliff, which was amazing because he loved me.
and he never lost his temper, right?
No.
He was
No.
and so when you see kind of like how I interact with retailers, it's taking the strengths of both of those mentors and trying to combine them.
I can totally see it now.
Yeah.
There's something to be said. Go ahead, Justin.
No, go ahead, man.
There's something to be said about just that can be such a sorely missed experience for a lot of people, is having that person take you under their wing and kind of show you the ropes and do it in like a, before the word empowerment was such a big word, an empowering way, right? Like I worked space and defense for 15 years, and the guy who was my mentor was he was one of the, like, everybody could not stand him. They thought he was the biggest jerk because of how he, talked to people and this and that. But to me, because he took me under his wing and he empowered me, and he could do no wrong. And I felt good about, I enjoyed going to work and knowing that somebody like that is willing to give you that time and take you under their wing and do that stuff. I don't know if there's less of that or what in today's corporate world or work world, but that is such an important thing that needs to happen.
Yeah, the way corporate works now, it's reverse, right? A lot of people want to protect their jobs, so they're not going to mentor as much because that person can now take their job, and that's been the switcheroo coming from corporate basically my whole life into the comic book industry. But Philip, I was going to say, so you got 2000 and 2005. What is that pivot moment? What inspires you to the next phase?
So I was a year in customer service, and then I moved up to the purchasing department. There was an opening for what Diamond called a brand manager on the comics team, which was basically the publisher liaison. Purchasing was a little bit of a misnomer back then. It was technically a purchasing position, but because Diamond was an effective monopoly, if not a legal monopoly, and by the way, that cut both ways. I saw your face, Dennis, and I'll say, like, yes, in all the negative ways you can think about that, it was true, but also because they were keenly aware of it, I really think that in the era that I was there, Diamond went above and beyond and did things that were actually they wouldn't have done if they were in a competitive environment and they had to just look out for their own best interests, right? They were looking out for Diamond's best interests,
Sure.
but also looking out for the industry's best interests, right?
Well, and it's what I used to always say. It's like, look, they're a monopoly. They're a needed monopoly. I just need them to be a benevolent monopoly.
Right. But keep in mind, in 1982, when Diamond started, they weren't a monopoly, right? And so you have to look at monopoly as a definition of, did you start as a monopoly? No. What happened was you became a monopoly. And there's a big difference of wording there. But anyways, that's...
Yeah, I mean, maybe a more generous and even fair way to think about it is they were the last man standing, and they were the survivor. And so the reason I say purchasing wasn't really purchasing is because the way the Diamond system was built, and this is pre-FOC, is essentially the retailers determined what the orders were. And then as a brand manager, I would decide, are we going to bring in 5% extra, 10% extra? Do we want to take a really big position on this and do 15% extra above the orders for reorder activity? And then it was on the publisher to make sure that they had enough inventory to fill reorders if something really took off. So it was really much more of like a relationship role between Diamond and the publishers. And I started off as the junior member, with relatively small accounts. So accounts like Oni and I'm trying to think, Broadsword and Cartoon Books and Aardvark of Anaheim. So a lot of, like, again, really fortunate, when I came in, I got to be there for the conclusion of Bone, and I got to be there for the conclusion of Cerebus, and kind of watch those.
Well, and you got to work under one of the smartest guys in the industry, Bill Shanus.
Quite a few, right? Because Bill was actually, when I got there, it was like Bill was my 3-up, maybe even 4-up boss, and under him over time so Bill was the head of the department, and again, a pioneer and one of the smartest guys. Then you had John Werzer, who was his right hand, who came from the warehouse side. So, I mean, in terms of a logistics mentor, one of the more brilliant folks. And then Jim Kohoric ran the comics team. Jim was definitely somebody who mentored me and took me under his wing and wanted me to succeed. And when I first got there was also an assistant manager above me. So anyway, I was there 5 years, and during the course of that, I had worked my way up to assistant manager. My biggest account was Image. At the time, there was a dedicated rep for Marvel, a dedicated rep for DC, and then essentially the next two largest publishers were Dark Horse and Image. At the time, Dark Horse had a larger market share than Image. So me and the Dark Horse rep still had to juggle probably another like 50 accounts in addition to Image. But I built a relationship with that team. They were one of my favorite publishers. And again, a little bit of industry history here. Because in the mid to late 90s, there was a rift among the Image founders, which ultimately led to Rob Liefeld being pushed out of Image. There's a brief period before the other partners got together and voted Rob out that Mark Silvestri left.
Oh.
And Mark, when he left as part of Top Cow, had hired Matt Hawkins, and they had built their own infrastructure to be an independent publisher. And when Mark came back in, he kept the infrastructure that he had built with Matt, because he always wanted the option, if Image was going in a direction he didn't like, that he could keep going and continue publishing. And so there was this weird thing where no other partner studio had a direct relationship with Diamond. And technically, Top Cow didn't. But Matt made sure that he was always talking to the Diamond team. So I met Matt, and in early 2006, he approached me and said, you know, Top Cow's going to go on a pretty exciting run here. I've got, you know, some stuff cooking, and I really like working with you. Do you want to come over and do marketing and sales for us? I had just bought a house in Baltimore, like literally months, like we were closing on the house. And I was like, Matt, this sounds awesome. I'd love to jump to publishing. I'm not moving to California because I'm going to take a bath on this house if I try to sell it months after, you know, as I'm closing it. And Matt, to his credit, let me work remote to start with, which again, in 2006 was not something anybody did.
Yeah.
And I did that for about 18 months as the VP of Marketing and Sales. And again, VP of Marketing and Sales in a department of one. So just
there you go. Yeah.
Before titles are nice, but they don't necessarily mean a whole heck of a lot. But I did that for about 18 months, and Top Cow was doing really fantastic. And as we were heading into 2008, what Matt knew was that we had the Wanted movie coming out in 2008. Funimation was bringing the Witchblade animated anime series over that had been done in Japan, and the Darkness video game was going to be released. And so he saw an opportunity, and he said, look, I'm going to need to focus on trying to grow these non-publishing sides of the business and see if we can make a run of this and turn this into, you know, a series of successes. Would you like to step up and be the publisher of Top Cow? The catch being that you have to move to Los Angeles, which obviously I did at that point. So those are kind of the two leaps that pulled me deeper and deeper into the business.
What a great place to land.
I'm going to ask you a question that I've been wanting to ask since 2006. What is EIDOS?
So it's I don't know if they still exist. It was a video game publisher that did Tomb Raider. And I think the reason you're asking me is because at one point they had a minority stake in Top Cow. And it was around the time that...
And they put it above the stamp.
Yeah.
Right. And so and the reason I say that I don't think they're around anymore is I think they were purchased by another company that ultimately was comfortable with letting that stake in Top Cow go. Again, I don't have direct insight into kind of where that stands, but that's why that was connected with Top Cow, and that's also why they were publishing the Tomb Raider comics at the time.
And how did you pronounce that?
IDOS.
IDOS.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they were a video game maker. Yeah, I remember that back in the day. I was a huge fanboy for Top Cow. obviously Michael Turner. I'm a big Turner fan. I at the time I was even a bigger David Finch fan, and I was such a geek for that series Ascension. To me, that was I started collecting comics in '89 with the Batman movie, but I really got into comics around the time period of when, like, those early 2000s with that Top Cow stable of creators. And man, what a crazy time period for comics.
And I came in it sideways because at that time, 2000, I was a booking agent for celebrities. So I'm at all the comic book conventions, and there is no doubt that Top Cow brought an A game to the convention scene during that time.
Yeah.
That was unlike anything else. And yeah, now in hindsight, it was sexist. You know, they had the women in the low-rise pants with the cow
It's a different
thongs and bikinis. But at a comic book convention in 2000, 2001, that's all you needed to be the number one game, the cock of the walk at a Comic-Con.
Yeah.
It was, and it was part of the brand, you know.
Yeah.
The brand was edgy and sexy, and it didn't take itself too seriously. And that was, you know, that's because that was the studio that Mark Silvestri founded, and that's who Mark is. He's hilarious, really dry sense of humor. He's looks like a rock star, you know.
Did you have to keep milk crates around so that you had to, like, jump up on top of him to look him eye to eye when you had conversations with him?
Yeah, pretty close.
Yeah,
pretty close. Yeah. He's a very tall man.
He is.
And again, I've told this story again multiple times, so I won't belabor it here. But like, when I say he was a rock star, you know, the first time I met him was at Wizard World Arlington, because I was hired by Matt Hawkins, who, again, one of my, you know, great mentors in my career. And I was a fan of Mark. I grew up on Mark's work. You know, I collected his X-Men, Wolverine work, Cyberforce. I was in on all of it. And so I met him at this Wizard World Arlington show, and it's out in basically next to Six Flags in the middle of nowhere. There's a convention center, there's a Six Flags, and a bunch of hotels. And so there's nowhere really to go or do. So we were hanging out at a sports bar in one of these hotels, and me and the rest of the guys in the pit, which is what we called the guys who were in the studio, had gotten there early, and we were working. He was flying in for probably to do an appearance on Saturday and Sunday. And I got a text from him. "Hey, Philip, where are you?" "We're hanging out at the sports bar." And mind you, we could not have gotten a waitress's attention if somebody had shot us and we were bleeding out on the floor. Like, you know, like, they were just, like, begrudgingly checking in with us every once in a while. And I don't blame them. And the way I remember it is, we're sitting around. Mark says, "Okay, cool, I'll come down. I'll see you guys in a couple minutes." So he comes down to the sports bar, walks in. It's night. He's wearing sunglasses. He's got the long hair, the goatee, the, you know, designer
leather pants, probably.
Yeah, like the designer shirt. And all of a sudden, half a dozen waitresses who I have never, like, haven't seen him all night. Like, he walks in. How can we help him?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that's who I work for.
Yeah.
Okay. Is the Philip in 1999 to 2007, 2008, or is there any fanboy moments, or are you already past that?
Oh no, there were a ton of them. I mean, you know, early on in the industry, you know, I'll give a shout out to Nick Barucci, who I met when I got into purchasing. So Nick was one of my accounts with Dynamic Forces, and then when he started Dynamite, and he was always incredibly generous with introducing me to people and taking me places. Two of my favorite memories, one of the ones I recounted at the Ringos this year, was I was at a Baltimore Comic-Con, and he invited me to dinner at Morton's. And I'd been to publisher dinners, and it's usually you talk business and
right. Yeah.
What are you trying to? You need an extra page in previews. You're launching a big book. You know, And he's like, oh, you doing anything tonight? No, come to dinner. Okay, great. I show up at Morton's. I sit down at the table and I realize it's Walt and Louise Simonson. It's Jim Starlin. It's Howard Chaykin. It's Nick, probably somebody else that was supposed to be there. And then this 20-something-year-old snot-nosed kid that has no right to even be a fly on the wall. And I just sat and listened, because if you've ever spent any time with those creators, you know that it's like going to a variety show for 2 hours, and you just get the best stories, right? And then another time I was in San Diego. This was probably the second or third San Diego I was at, and I think I was actually not even there in any official capacity. I had made plans to go to San Diego as a fan, and I was, in some hotel out in the sticks, sharing a room with 8 other people who's got the bathtub tonight, who's on the floor.
Yeah.
And I had gone back to the room after the show, and I was, after dinner, and I was getting ready to crash out, and I just kind of looked around. I was like, no, you know what? I'm gonna get up and I'm gonna go back. Like, I've never been to BarCon. I don't know where to even find BarCon, but my choices are, I can be uncomfortable here in this hotel room with people that I know, kind of, or I can go try to see if I can find something. So I ended up at the Marriott bar. And again, you also have to, at the time, as kind of a junior employee at Diamond, I was maybe scratching $23,000 a year. So I'm like, those Southern California beer prices, I'm like,
right. Wait a second. What was this the year that the bar on the second floor was shut down and we were all out back down the steps?
No, I know the year you're talking about, but no, this would have been,
okay.
It was still the second floor bar.
Okay.
And I'm hanging out there nursing a beer as slowly as I possibly can, trying to make that $10 or $12 stretch.
Right.
And Nick sees me, and he doesn't even know me that well at that point. I just become his rep, and he comes over. He's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm just hanging out. What are you up to?" He's like, "Come with me."
Yep.
Do you know how? And then he goes, "Do you know how to play poker?" And I'm like, "Sure." Played some college friendly poker in college with buddies. Yeah. We get in the elevator, and he hits, whatever the top floor is, and he goes, "Right, we're going up to Jim Lee's poker game." Now, Brian knows why. I know why you made that reaction, because I'd read about Jim Lee's poker game in Wizard magazine when I was a kid. I was like, "Oh,
yeah."
And he looks at me and he goes, "It's what was it? It was like a $100 buy-in."
$100, yeah.
And he must have just seen my eyes do that. And without missing a beat, and again, this is why Nick's the best, he just looked at me and goes, "I got you."
Yep.
And what he didn't realize is the way I'm wired, that was actually worse, because now I'm playing with somebody else's money.
Right.
And,
sure.
and losing somebody else's money in the way that my dad raised me is worse than losing your own money.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And there's a challenge there, right? What's the number one rule? Never take away from your friends. So you're very cautious on beating people that you don't know, that you want to get to know, right? So it's like, and the whole thing in golf, never beat your boss in golf, ever.
So if you thought I was nursing that $10 beer,
right? Sure.
I was nursing that buy-in. I mean, it was like I was doing the small ante every time, and just like, how slowly can we get around the table for me to fold?
Right. Yeah.
And so I'm just like, I don't have a plan.
Who was at your table? Who was at your table?
What? Well, hold on, you guys. I think it's time for this.
Right.
Oh, yes.
Valuable commodity I know of is information. Wouldn't you agree?
Now, when you ask who's sitting at the table, I'm thinking This is where Unfiltered Time is the best, right? Let's get it.
Well, I hope this isn't disappointing. I'm trying, again, bear in mind, this was probably 20 years ago at this point, maybe longer. And the thing about, at that point, Jim's poker game is there were multiple tables set up in the suite, right? You're not just at the one table. So I think Nick was at the table. I think there were some other DC folks. And I'm sure there were creators there, but
Your head's
I'll be
spinning
honest,
and you
I can't I can't remember exactly who. And again, I'm just trying to figure out, how do I get out alive?
Yeah.
But there is, maybe this will be the unfiltered bit, is Jim would move around the room, right? And kind of sit at the different tables and play a bit. And so he sits down at one point, he's sitting across from me. Oh, it's Jim Lee. Holy cow.
Yeah.
On Mount Rushmore of teenage Philip's wall of aspirations. And Jim's a very good poker player. So he's just winning hand after hand. And again, I'm just like, fold, just trying to make conversation.
Pocket aces, fold.
So at one point, kind of late into the night for me, because I'm probably down to my last like $20-$30, and Bob Schreck walks in with Frank Miller into the suite, and Jim spots it and goes and looks over at Fletch, who was a longtime DC employee, ran the booth. Fletch, take my seat. Fletch sits down across from me. Jim excuses himself and goes to talk to Frank. And at that moment, Jesse, I got the pocket pair. I don't think they were aces, but they were like kings, right?
Right.
And I went, oh, like, this is it.
Right.
And I went all in. And Fletch stayed in with me. And I beat him.
With Jim's money.
With Jim's money. And so technically, I beat Jim Lee.
Jim Lee, there you go.
Is the story that I tell.
Yeah.
But I basically, I went all in. I cashed out. It was exactly $100. And I went, I'm so tired. I think we're going to call it a night, guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Cashed out, handed Nick his $100, said, thank you so much. This was an amazing night.
Is this the moment when you realize the con is not even important? It's after the con that is the more important thing of going to conventions? Or is something else happening here?
Yeah, I think those, in those early days, it's understanding that if you're behind the scenes and you're in the industry of comics, the convention is oftentimes the vehicle to get everybody together and the economic engine that allows that to happen. But what's happening on the floor, that's for the fans, right? And that is about generating enough interest or excitement or revenue to justify the expense of being there. But, very quickly for me, I would spend more of my time, and I would say for the last 10 years, I might step on the show floor of a big show once.
Yep.
And maybe twice if I'm checking to see if my booth went up the right way and talk to the team, because everything else is meetings offsite.
Yeah.
What was
not to sidetrack Philip's story here. I just got to throw this in there. So it was a year or two after that. Your year is the year that they closed the Marriott bar to do a whole full remodel. And then they turned that suite into like a little mini bar. And then so there was like a little mini bar up on the top floor. And I got to hang out with Kevin Eastman, a whole bunch of people. And I'm an actor guy. I'm sidelined for the comics. I'm a comic geek at heart. And so I came back around at like 1:00, and the action had all moved down those steps into that patio courtyard. Yeah. And a good friend of mine, Bill Baker, who was a comic journalist at that time, went to college with me. He introduced me to Bob Schreck on the steps out in front of San Diego, and I spot Bob Schreck down there. And I had a little mini bar that I cleaned out my hotel mini bar, and Bob's like, "Oh, what do you got?" And Bob and I are just drinking little mini bottles of booze at like 2 a.m. out in that Marriott. And people, Bob Schreck, and I would love to get him on here. He would hold court like you never saw anyone. Everybody loved Bob Schreck. Everybody had to come up and glad hand with him. Yeah. And meanwhile, I had no idea who he was at that time, other than, just this guy that I got introduced to earlier that weekend.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Did you jump from Top Cow to Boom, or was there anything in between? You went. So what?
Yeah.
What was that like? Because you're doing the whole Top Cow thing, and where you kind of. I don't know. Did you have people that, because you mentioned earlier, I can't remember if it was backstage or if it was on the show, but you mentioned how, at Boom, you were spending all this time, much more time dealing with stuff that you hadn't spent before, this big jumping to Boom.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, the context there is that I was the guy that picked up the phone when Ross called Diamond to set up the Atomica and then eventually Boom accounts with Diamond. So, and Ross, as anybody who's watched your episodes with him knows, is a very smart guy who values relationships and understands the importance of those. And so what really, talking on the phone with Ross, he stood out among comic book publishers or new comic book publishers. And then he really jumped out because early on in those Boom days, he had planned a trip out to North Carolina to ask his future father-in-law for his blessing to ask his wife to marry him. And again, he was savvy enough to go, you know what, I'm going to book my flight through Baltimore and I'm going to go visit Diamond because I need to, sit down with the Diamond folks and put faces with names and build a relationship. And so one of the things that I remember when I left Diamond and I went to Top Cow, that I thought to myself as I said, well, I've just spent 5 years being everybody's friend because people needed stuff from me.
Sure.
So who's going to call me in the next 2 weeks after I can't do anything for them, and I'm technically one of their competitors? And the 3 people that called me that I always remembered were Larry Young, who founded AIT Planet Lar, Alan Payne, who's works for Nick right now at Dynamite, but at the time was at Tokyo Pop, and Ross. And so I was like, okay, now I know the people that I have real relationships with. And so when I moved out to LA, Ross and his wife were part of our friend group. And so we were just friends. And he called me up one day and said, what do you think about coming over? And at the time, Top Cow had reached a point where I think, and I don't want to put words in their mouths, but my feeling of it was that Mark and Matt had decided, you know what, we've tried a couple times doing the big expansion. We staffed up, the 2011 economic crash, or there was the 2008 crash, but it impacted comics in 2010, 2011, had really impacted Top Cow and disrupted a lot of plans. And so I think at that point they were like, you know what, we're going to focus on making sure that we're making our books, which is what we both got into this for, and really kind of keep the line tight and contained. So there was maybe like 4 employees at that point. I was one of them. And what Ross pitched me was, we're going to grow and we're going to scale. And my goal is to make Boom one of the big publishers in the industry. And that spoke to my ambition. At the same time, I had just, my first daughter had been born in 2011. So she was coming up on about a year old. And I realized that none of the comics that the dad was publishing were things that I could hand to my kid. And so, as a dad, that was something that was really appealing, was everything that Boom was doing on the kids side. So that was why I made that leap. And when I made the leap, Boom was 15 people. I was the 15th employee. And again, I started in as the vice president of marketing and publishing. So ostensibly, I was overseeing 2 departments. Those 2 departments had 1.5 employees. And so over the 12 years I was there, I ended up building out technically 5 departments, and we scaled the company from 15 people to, I think at its peak, around 60.
Right.
And I just want to say one thing, and I think I touched on it on one of the episodes we had. I didn't have any idea until about 2 years ago how detached, and not in a bad way, how detached Ross was, and how absolutely Filip was 100% at a certain level, boom. Whereas, because Ross basically handed the entire company to you and said, I need you to run this because I'm going to go do some other stuff.
Well, that's mostly true. I think so. There was a period where Ross, there were periods in that 12-year period where Ross, for example, had to focus more on building the Hollywood pipeline.
Yep.
So around the time that we got our first look deal with Fox, and then Fox invested in the company, that was really one of the big priorities, was servicing that relationship and building that side of the business. So, Ross might spend 3 days a week on the Fox lot working on film and TV stuff, and then 2 days a week in the publishing office. But I think for retailers, I was definitely the face of Boom, and I was the one running those departments that they interacted with the most. But, credit where credit's due, it really was a joint effort with myself, Matt Gagnon, who's, the editor-in-chief there still, Stephen Christie, who's president of development on the film and TV side, who's still there. And then there were 3 different financial officers that came through. But it really, Ross would weigh in on the big strategy stuff, and then it was up to us as any organization grows.
Exactly.
You have to say, okay.
Now, I'm not saying that Ross was like detached in a bad way. He was. Yeah. He had. But here, what I'm saying is he knew how capable you were at running the company, that it allowed him to go do the other stuff. Trust me, from my standpoint, I leave for half an hour, and then I'm like, no. If we're out of dimes, you can just use 2 nickels. You don't need to bug me about this.
What year did you join Boom?
2012.
2012. So from 2000 to 2012, when did you realize you weren't going to be doing art?
Probably about, I would guess about 2003, 2004.
Okay.
And part of that was
all right.
Realizing that. Yeah. Go ahead.
But here's the thing. We all know the Boom story. We've had Ross on here. It's a great story. I love it, but I have to hear about the new project, because like I said, 2 out of the 5 best stories I've ever heard is you talking about your new shoes, talking about, I forget the title of the other one, but I knew when the second, and we talked about it on this show, the second Filip left Boom, I'm like, oh, he's already got something else cooking. And then I message you, and you're like, just wait. And then we get it. Tell us about the new project.
So the new project is
the giant poster behind you.
Yeah, Ignition Press, and there you go. Yeah, we just got back from New York, where we revealed the name of the company, and that poster's from the soft launch party that we threw. So yeah, this is something that it's the first time that I've had the opportunity to build something, and I'm doing it with 3 co-founders and partners. Jamie S. Rich, who anybody who's been in comics for a while will recognize, whether it's from being the editor-in-chief at Oni Press early in his career, or most recently editor-in-chief at IDW. He was the Batman editor. He helped relaunch Vertigo. He I mean, Jamie's CV would take me the rest of the hour
cutting
to
edge
figure out.
Cutting edge comic creator.
Yeah, and then Jeremy Hahn is a writer and an artist. If you haven't checked out The Beauty or The Realm, which he did at Image, or Red Mother, which he and The Approach, which he did at Boom, absolutely fantastic. And I met Jeremy about 20 years ago when he did his first Image book. I noticed him when he did his first Image book, which was Paradigm. And then I met him around the time he was doing Battle Hymn at Image with B. Clay Moore. And I always liked him, but as I got to know him, I realized you realize as a behind the scenes person that there's a rare type of creator that thinks about the business of comics as much as they do about the creativity of it. James Tynan is one of those creators. Folks like Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips thinking about their brand and how to build it. Mark Miller, certainly.
Yeah. 1%.
Robert Kirkman, so on, and so I had brought Jeremy over to Top Cow first to draw the Berserker series we did over there with Vowels, with Milo Ventimiglia and Rick Lovard. So he had drawn that, and then I had recruited him to come exclusively to Top Cow to draw The Darkness for a period of time. So we got to be really close, and I think always had a ton of respect for each other. And Jeremy was actually the one that introduced me to the fourth partner, Eric Gitter, who is a film and TV producer. He's produced, folks that have been around the industry for a long time know that he worked with Oni for many years, for about a 5 to 6 year period there as their representative in Hollywood. So he was the producer on Scott Pilgrim, Atomic Blonde, and both Extraction movies, which were all adaptations of Oni Press comics. So I got introduced by Jeremy in 2018 to Eric, and at the time they were talking about, well, we maybe want to put something together, but it was very broad. It wasn't really fully formed yet, and I was like, okay, well, these are interesting conversations, but Boom was really starting to take off at the time. I didn't feel like I was ready to step out on my own, and then the conversation kind of naturally hit a pause button for a period of time. And then earlier this year, Jeremy calls me up and he says, hey, you remember that guy I introduced you to? And you remember that thing we were talking about? I say, oh yeah, I remember that. Whatever happened to that? And he said, well, we've got the financing. We're ready to go. Are you ready to make the leap? And again, just like as I was leaving art school, I kind of see the fork in the road. And one fork, which was very interesting and very exciting, would have been to go on this next phase with Boom and go into the biggest trade book publisher in the world and build a single issue comic book imprint within that infrastructure. And so that was really exciting. But, as I was talking with Jeremy and I was talking with Eric, I felt like, you know what, I've never built something from the ground up that I could say had my DNA in it from the beginning. And I think in life you get these gut feelings where you're like, okay, I'm at the intersection of something here. And the intersection for me was I have all the experience that I would need to do this and do this the right way. I'm barely, but I'm still young enough to where I have the energy to do this. Because 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I don't know that I will have the energy to start from the ground up again. And it's the right people, it's people that I had both trust and respect for. And I spent a lot of time with Eric. Like anybody who's done interviews with me will tell you that I'm exhausting. Like I don't believe in first impressions. I'm kind of like that interviewer that's like, no, let's go out on a third or fourth date or fifth date. Let's see what we're really about. And so I really, asked a lot of questions and kicked the tires on it because if I was going to do this, I wanted to do it right. And that's why the leap. And I think, people have been asking kind of like, what is Ignition about? What's going to make it different? I know that I saw some
questions in the chat. Yeah.
Alex asked about, what's next and kind of what are the comics? So we won't be in comic shops until next year. August is kind of the time frame that we're targeting at this point, and what we've been telling folks, because we have the luxury of time. If you see comic publishers announce and then rush, it's oftentimes because there's a capital issue there, right? Yep. Where it's like you got to start generating cash flow, and we're very fortunate that we're coming into this with the experience and the understanding of how much capital is required to do it the right way and to actually improve things for creators and retailers and make sure everybody's armed with all the information that they need. So we're in the lab. We're building right now.
Hey, Philip, so you were quoted, I don't know where you were quoted, about the medium being at a high point like it was in 2019. Did that help your decision going into Ignition as well?
Well, I'm not sure where the quote came from, but specifically what I was thinking about was, and this did inform it, was, we had this big pop during the pandemic, right? Everybody's home. And this happened in every form of entertainment, every medium, right? Yep. It happened for film, TV, video games, you name it, right? And certainly happened for comics. And then there was this market correction as people started to get back to, I'm going on vacation, I'm going out to restaurants, I'm going to see shows. And so, 2022, 2023, the sky was falling again. If you actually pulled back and you looked at it, and I saw this, I can say this from the boom perspective. If you compared 2023 to 2021, that was a big dip. If you compared it to 2019, that was still going up.
Well,
right?
and the thing was, and I know we're friends, and I used to tag you in all my little videos and stuff. And when the pandemic was going on, I was doing all these videos. And I said, if you have even the dumbest idea that you think is something that you would like to try, when this thing is over, the pandemic, that's your time to try it, because everybody is resetting. Everything is plateaued back down again. This is your time to try things new for you.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I'm just saying, when I saw you doing this, I'm like,
well,
he's
and
right
what I
there.
see is you have this dip, and then where we are right now is we're in the nostalgia zone, right?
Yes.
Which is like the industry and the world around us feels very unstable. And so in moments of instability, people go towards comfort, right? You want mac and cheese. You want a warm blanket, right? And so if you look at everything that's working right now, it's essentially, I used to say that like the best way to publish for nostalgia is 90% familiar and 10% different.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you get that warm blanket, or you get that mac and cheese, but
look at Nikki Barucci.
You put a little lobster on it. Oh, that's interesting.
Right.
But look at Nikki Barucci and look at Robert Kirkman. They have milled all of the smartest IPs that are mac and cheese.
Yep.
And my prediction and what I'm betting on, and I know we have some retailers in the chat as well. I saw Haven in there, so.
Yep.
Is that, we get into next year, maybe it'll be middle of next year, maybe it'll be tail end of next year, and things will have stabilized. The coffers will be a little bit replenished because of these nostalgic sales, right? And at that point, people will start to get curious about, well, what's the next Walking Dead? What's the next saga?
What's the next Something is Killing the Children?
What's the next Something is Killing the Children? So that's where, again, I hope that Ignition will be well timed is coming into that space and saying, we have something new, and Haven, just to answer, I saw a couple questions in there. So one of the questions was traditional comic book publisher or trying to disrupt like distillery. And one of the ways we approached building Ignition was, well, let's make a list of all the things we've been complaining about for 20 plus years. And how many of those things can we fix?
Right.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So the things that work about the industry, the things that work about the format, or, work about how the stories are told, they don't need fixing. But at the same time, as Dennis said, the world today, in all businesses, but certainly in the comic book business, isn't the one that existed in 2019.
No.
And all of you have been going through that, and looking at like, okay, what are the new channels?
Well, but
how do we meet the audience where they are?
Yeah.
Right.
But you've also seen through Boom some of the best ideas you've ever had.
Yes.
Once and future, never catching hold. You've seen some of but then Something Is Killing the Children that I think you thought was going to be a success, but I don't think you thought it was going to be anywhere near the success it was, blows up. And I mean, you can never predict.
No, go ahead, Phil. Go ahead.
I was going to say here's the one thing you can. So anybody that tells you that they can predict what the market's going to respond to has recrafted a story or is fooling themselves.
Right. Right.
Kirkman had the most honest answer ever when an interviewer asked him, "Why do you think The Walking Dead worked when all these other zombie things didn't work?" And he said, "Hell, I don't know. If I knew, I'd have 10 of them."
Yep.
And that is the reality of being in the creative business. Is it's as much art as science. And the thing that we're going to bet on is you can increase those odds if you are betting on the creators and you are betting on the stories they want to tell. Because the biggest successes in my career have always come from a creator saying, this is a thing that I'm incredibly passionate about. It was never the project where the creator was trying to anticipate what the market was going to respond to or what the publisher was going to say yes to.
See, I like to say Mark Millar is maybe the Bruce Lee at that. He sits there and is like, oh no, this is the story I want to tell. And now I'm going to go tell this story. And now I'm going to, oh wait, you finally caught up to the idea that I had 5 stories ago? Sure, cool, let's do something with it. But I'm going to be 5 this way by the time you get to it. So I'm just going to keep going.
Yeah. Hey, Philip, can you talk about the 3 mechanisms of and platforms in our business? You have direct distribution, crowdfunding. Can you talk about those 3 and how that is the future?
Yeah, I think, well, excuse me, my throat's drying up. I think that I look at, when I started in the business, there was effectively one channel for comic books. There was the direct market. And the strength of the direct market is how stable it is. And it goes through ups and downs, it takes hits. But the reality is, and I remember Jamie saying this to me when he was at Oni in those early days. And again, this was kind of a dip in the market. He was like, we knew that if we put out decent content, we could sell 2,000 copies of just about anything, right? And there are few markets in the world where you have enough accounts that are passionate enough about what they do and a core audience that's passionate about comics that you can kind of bet on that as a baseline, right? But now you have direct to consumer, you still have the direct market, you have the book market, you have digital, right? And within digital, there's different modalities of, and business models. And so one of the things that we've been looking at is how do you meet each of those audiences where they are? And this is the second time it's come up, so I will confirm regular size. comics, just to like answer that question.
That's because that's what Alex just. I'm glad you're keying in on that. Please, Alex dropped a $5 super chat. He says, "Please keep your new comics at the standard format. No one wants magazine size." My opinion.
Well, and that's
and put your numbers on top and your name on top. And
I don't know if you saw
hold on 1 second. I gotta get on my rant here. As a comic book buyer, I don't want to go through my box and try to figure out what number it is because people put the freaking number on the bottom or the name of the book. So just a slight suggestion from a collector.
And I don't know if you ever got the feedback from the San Diego that I had the undivided attention of Boom's entire sales staff. Remember when I couldn't find the room and I called you and you were like, "Oh no, it's on the second floor." And I go up there and not one other retailer decided to go to that thing. So it was basically Lee and the entire sales staff and me. And I decided to stay there for like 50 minutes and just tell them. And I'm like, and the one thing I kept trying to bash into their head was this magazine size doesn't work. Yeah. And you're not going to get my kids. They want manga size. And we went round and round with that. And, I definitely think that the chat understands too, that magazine size, as beautiful as it is. And Lee's work was amazing. It just doesn't translate to comic fans.
So the three ways. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. But everybody at Oni understands Scott Pilgrim was the most successful comic book to come out of our world. And it was never comic size.
Yeah, I think it goes back to, it has to make sense for the story you're telling, and it has to be appropriate for the audience that you're trying to reach and meeting them where they are, right? So if you're trying to reach kids who have grown up on manga, then maybe formatting it in a manga size at north of 160, 180 pages is the way to do it. So I think there are all these different markets, and the question is, how do you leverage them and use them in a way to open up the funnel is essentially, and make the pie bigger, right? Because this is the other thing that I've spent almost 25 years watching, is everybody's fighting over the same small piece of the same pie. Yes. And that typically is a race to the bottom, right? And so the question is, if you have the resources and you have the time, can you actually make the pie bigger? And so I know that was one of the questions, was what makes Ignition Press different? That is our goal. We are actively going to be reaching outside of the endemic comic book audience. And we're going to be focusing on creators. And a lot of the other stuff that we will be doing, frankly, will be behind the scenes and invisible. There's no gimmick, it's about making the system stronger and better. And yes, Haven, making readers. And that's not to say that we don't love collectors. We do. Everybody in this room has been a collector, if not now, at some point, right? But it's ultimately, if you just keep pulling from the same group of collectors over and over and over, eventually they get exhausted, right? Which is why we get these ebbs and flows in this, because,
Well, at the same point, it's great to be a collector, and it's great to want to go through new whatever new back issues a store has just gotten a new collection, and look through all those great keys and everything and collect those things. But if you don't have something taking that place, if there's not something new being created that is making new keys, new great storylines that become iconic collectibles, we're screwed. We need those new stories. We need Absolute Batman by Nick Dragotta. We need Doom by Hickman and Sanford Green. We need those new things. Something is Killing the Children, with a character like Erica Slaughter. We need these new keys to be created, and the creators writing those stories and drawing them, and that's such a big important thing to create those new keys. That is it. And if you don't have it, we're just cutting ourselves off, cutting our nose off to spite our face.
I remember, and Philip, I'm hoping that you can bail me out, or Jesse, because I can't remember the name of the publisher, but it was 2009 Retailer Summit in Las Vegas. And this brand new publisher gets up on stage and they start going through their presentation. And this is a post-apocalyptic world where the Nazis took over and time travelers have to go back to undo it. And our next series is a post-apocalyptic world where this happens and our heroes have to go do this. And here's a post-apocalyptic world. And I'm just like, okay, do you have anything other than post-apocalyptic worlds to offer us? Because that's kind of a narrow niche. And meanwhile, you've got these giant wide stretches. 2009 was a great innovative year as well for comics. People were trying all sorts of new stuff. And I think that's also what Sequential Geek is talking about over here. Where do you see IP? I'm just shortening it. I don't know. Do you guys call it IP?
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
We figured that there's a couple of fun Easter eggs in the logo and in the name.
And I know you liked my comment about your logo and name too. And but where do you see what's the target demographics you're going for? What's the age groups you're going for? What are the story spreads that you're going for? You don't have to give us specifics. I know you're not to that point yet, but when you're in the lab, which chemicals are you mixing to get to that solution?
So as a starting point, the age group is going to be essentially teen and up. And that's not ultimately where we want to end up. We want to be able to service any audience. But the reality is, unless you have an established pipeline into schools and education systems and a reliable way to connect with parents, you are not going to be able to unlock middle grade sales. And I know this from the experience of Boom. That takes time to build, right? So to begin with, teens and up, because they can be advertised to directly, and digital advertising is a terrific tool if you know how to use it and how to pull people in and provide value to them before you start asking them to spend money. That's the other thing that we've spent a lot of time thinking about is, the mechanism of the direct market as it exists, and and that is still the primary funnel that most independent comic book publishers sell their and market their material through. You're in a 2.5 month sprint. And the first time you're engaging with an audience, you're doing it with your hand out, asking them for money.
Right. Sure.
Well,
that's a tough sell.
Right.
I'll give you one interesting tidbit. So when did Scott Pilgrim came out in 2001? And at that time I was on the convention circuit, and I had no idea, because even though I was, in the world, my sister, who's 20 years younger than me, she was into Scott Pilgrim. I had no idea. And when I opened my comic book store, the first thing she was like, "Oh, can you get me the Scott Pilgrim box set? Because all my copies are too worn out." And I'm like, "I didn't even know you were reading Scott Pilgrim."
Yeah.
And so there are these markets that you just find out about.
Yeah.
And these people who had zero capture from anywhere in our world. And all of a sudden they get captured by these other things.
Right.
And Scott Pilgrim is a great great example as well of, like, there is a creator that, or a story and a franchise that it's just straight out of Brian Lee O'Malley's head, right? And it's taking all the things he was passionate about at that moment and the story he needed to tell, the song in his heart, and it's on paper, right? And credit to the folks over at Oni. Brian's prior book was Lost at Sea, which sold a handful of copies.
Yeah.
There's no reason that anybody at Oni, if you look at it through a purely business lens, should have said yes to that project.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to the, like, how do you pick hits? You have to some of it's about just shots on goal, right?
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to go back to so you can finish up on the platform question that I had asked you about all these opportunities to sound platforms. My overall question is, how is Ignition going to hit orphan customers that don't have comic book stores? What is the game plan for that at the small level that you're at now up to August?
Yeah, well, I think, look, the game plan is first and foremost work with the creators to build their communities, because ultimately, and you've heard it in the stories here, right? We connect with people.
Yeah.
And when we connect with those people, we become fans for life. I could have told you a dozen stories of meeting a creator as a teenager and buying everything they did. Mike Maringo was one of those creators for me. And so it's about making sure that we are building those communities, adding value to that community before we're asking them for anything. And so that's why I say it's going to be invisible for a lot of folks, because our goal is not for Ignition Press to be the thing that you recognize first. Ultimately, it's the creators we work with that people are going to be invested in. If we do our job right, over time, it's like A24, right? You watch that first movie, you're like, man, that was a really good movie. You watch another one, oh, that was really interesting. By the third one, you're like, man, I keep seeing this logo on all this stuff that I like, or HBO or FX or Pick, whatever your favorite thing is, right? But that's like, so our plan is to leverage the digital tools that exist, both organic and digital marketing tools, to help creators build their brands. And from there, I look at sales channels as funnels, right? And comic shops are the end point. And what I mean by that is comic shops, like traditional comic shops, are community hubs. So that's where you go when you've now identified as a comic book fan, because you want to be part of a community. You want that experience. You want that depth of knowledge that you get in a comic shop. You want that camaraderie. You want to be able to talk to the person behind the counter about what happened in Saga's last issue, or why, Scott Pilgrim's the greatest thing you've ever read. But there are all these barriers for lapsed and casual fans to get there. And so we have to bring them in piece by piece, right? And one of the ways, Jesse, to your point, is reaching out in the way that everybody's used to shopping at this point, which is I get excited about something, I click a button on my phone or on the internet, and it shows up at my house.
Yep.
Right.
And I think historically, the markets have seen themselves as in competition. And, I think when publishers have abused those channels, they can be, right? Because you're cannibalizing your sales. But if you're actually reaching out further, then what you're doing is you're pulling people further into the funnel and saying, hey, test this out. Did you like that? Great. You want to get a little bit deeper. Let me educate you. Let me, enrich your understanding of this art form, and that there may be other stories here that you would be excited to get into. So
are you avoiding the CF word right now by not using the word crowdfunding at all? Is that in all your platform or not?
It'll be part of it. Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I've got, obviously at Boom had a lot of success with Kickstarter and Backer Kit. We've got
Just
great relationships.
Just a tad.
Just a little bit.
Little bit. So
was that the biggest crowdfunded comic of all times?
Yeah.
It was until I think Neil Gaiman unseated us was the first one.
I mean, who is he? He's a flash in the pan.
If you're gonna get unseated by someone, Neil Gaiman with a Amazon streaming show and a best-selling novel is not a bad way to do it.
So crowdfunding in your mind is a positive thing for you to look at in the future for the build out of Ignition. Okay.
Yeah. And
I don't see why you can't. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. No.
No. Go ahead, Dennis.
I just see that all the possibilities are open right now, and if you don't try to fire on every cylinder, you're just not trying to drive.
Yeah, and
you're not trying to turn the ignition.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I think the reason why I asked that is a new company, you're trying to be a little bit different than everybody else. But you also have to understand there are platforms that work tremendously well. I've talked to, coming from the corporate world, we're saying, does the sell matter or does the buildup of a customer base even is more important? And as a new company, that's probably what your goal is, to build up that customer base that is following not just the one creator, but is following multiple creators with your company.
Right. And and being able to, pull people in through one channel. And Brian, I'm sure you've seen this too, like with the YouTube community, right? Somebody will come in through one channel and then realize, oh, all these channels are cross-pollinating and talking to each other, and there's a conversation happening here across across this community, right? And that makes you want to invest in it deeper.
Yeah.
One thing I figured I'd just address real quickly. I saw Mark in the chat, and he was mentioning that he had pitched some stuff to Boom. So that was one of, again, I oversaw a lot of departments. Editorial was not one of them, which is where the pitches come into. But the point that I actually wanted to make is that as a creator, I know it's tough when you're pitching stuff and it's not getting traction, right? And congratulations, Mark, by the way. I know that your current series is just on fire. That's fantastic.
It's a monster of a series.
Man, Dennis is on fire.
Is he?
Fire bad. Monsters.
But what you ultimately want with a publisher is you want a publisher who is as excited about your idea as you are, right?
Well, it's not just that. It's not just that. And it's one of the things that keeps coming up, and Jesse and I have quoted it in the last couple episodes. Nobody cares about your success more than you.
That's true. But when you pick a partner,
right,
you want someone that is as passionate or as excited or sees as much potential. And ultimately, I know it doesn't feel like it in the moment, but the no is actually a gift, right? Because the begrudging yes is actually going to cost you more in the long run than the no. And one of the creators we were talking to, one of my favorite things they said when we were talking to them is the only thing better than a enthusiastic yes is a prompt and definitive no.
Yep.
Because now the door's not open.
Yeah. There's something also, and I love the fact of how much you're keying in on the creator aspect of it, because the creator thing has also changed in a big way because of post-pandemic world, social media, being able to connect with creators so easily. And I think James Tynan has really shown this, that there are people that follow him and everything he does now in a major way, where it's jumping to Substack to make sure they're keying in on all that stuff, to what they're really following creators in a big way. And Mark Miller also, kind of like you were talking about earlier, Dennis, he did that 5 years ago. He figured out how to do it years ago. The creator thing is the most important part of all of this to me, and I really hope that that shows in what you guys are doing, because I think it's the smartest thing you guys can do.
Also, one of the things about the creators that have been associated with all the partners of Ignition Press is those guys never leave their publishers. They're not wandering around. They're happy where they are. You look at O'Malley. I think O'Malley's done every project for now 25 years with Oni.
Yeah, I think, here's the thing is creators in comics have moved around, but oftentimes that's because the publishers don't necessarily have the resources to do everything they want to do, right?
Right.
And so you do need to have the resources to be able to invest in creators. And And again, hopefully that's something that we can change, you know, as in terms of how we're approaching things. But I never, you know, begrudge creators for moving around. And also, frankly, because sometimes it's just like, okay, well, let me go over here and see, I think I had a good experience. Did I have a good experience? Right.
Is the grass greener?
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes you find out it is, and sometimes you find out it isn't. But I do think that, you know, the best version of this are the relationships and the partnerships between publishers and creators that are mutually beneficial. Right.
So one real quick thing, Jesse, that I want to ask about all this is you know, to the whole creator thing is so important, and the world that we live in, we really have this weird thing happening with AI art, and especially in comics. And, you know, I think it's starting to bubble maybe a little bit more, and creators are starting to see it a little bit, you know, and take, you know, public stances on it. Do you guys have a stance on AI art, whether it's, you know, art or AI creation in the story? What does Ignition Press have any stance on that yet?
Yeah, it's in our contracts. No AI.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
So if and you have to sign the contract before you turn in the work. So if you end up, you know, if it turns out you ended up using it, you're in breach of your contract, and there are ramifications.
Yep.
Wow.
Now, part of it is we're picking folks that we know are also interested in building their brands, right? And I think that's the great anecdote to these concerns about AI is you can replicate the look of something, but like you can't replicate the personality, you can't replicate the community, you can't replicate the connection. And so, you know, and again, there's a reason that Jeremy, as a creator, is one of the founding members of this. This is something that, you know, was important to all of us, but certainly for him as somebody who spent, you know, 25 years honing his craft and, you know, building stories. He wants that protected. So yeah, that was an easy one. That wasn't one we wrestled over very much.
Hell yeah, man.
So over the years, your passion and the people around you, obviously, for comic book stores is huge. I would say, and I can't speak for Dennis, but for myself, by far the most passionate brand who really felt they were partners with every comic book store out there, every LCS store out there. But now we have a situation where there's only 1,250 stores across the nation, right? Maybe a little bit more, maybe 50 here or 50 less. But there's 77,000 people that sell comic books on eBay right now. All right. So we're kind of the smaller denomination. How are you going to put LCSs in the forefront when you have so many other people selling comics that don't have brick and mortars?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Can I pause you for a second? Because I think you answered it when you were talking earlier. Jesse, he's not just looking at those comic stores. He's not just looking for the comic people. He's got his eyes on the schools. He's got his eyes on Scholastic.
Yes, I understand that. But the question is, how does he put in that game plan those 1,250 comic book stores without doing what most companies have now done, is said, oh, you want to do an exclusive or you want to do a variant at the I know you don't have a brick and mortar, but your check cleared. Okay, we're good to go. So Johnny Z's now has I'm going to use Ignition comic. That's my question.
So I'll answer that one the way that I've been answering it when a retailer asked me at New York last week, you know, what's y'all's position on variant covers and incentives and store exclusives? And I said, the best way I know to not get addicted to heroin is to never start doing heroin. So, and that's a little facetious. I'm not saying that there won't be variant covers. I think they have their place. But again, where store exclusives and variants are in the industry right now is a function of cash flow, right? And if you're going to stop doing something that's generating cash flow, you need to replace it with something else,
Right.
or
Right.
you have to make cuts. That's basic P&L, right? Like,
Right.
so I think that the way that I think about how do you support comic shops, which are, to my mind, still one of the most reliable and best ways to create repeat customers and fans, people that self-identify as part of the community and being comic book fans, is you should be focusing on tools to help them sell not the 1 in 25 to the one customer that's willing to pay for it,
Right.
but to sell those other 25 copies, right? And so, that will come in a variety of forms. Again, some of it is about making sure that going into selling your product, you have a community built and you have a way of communicating with them and educating them and driving them to the points of sales that you want them to engage in. And then the second piece of it is that within the stores, you are arming them with tools to help move units, right? So that's, go ahead, Dennis.
No. I see in the chat's going to scream at me. You're interrupting, Philip. But you're missing one key thing that I know you know, and it's what I talk to every publisher about and what I talk to every distributor level about. When we're missing the forest through the trees, when we look at 1,200 retail stores, you're missing out on those 5,000 employees and owners that I think are the core backbone of the comic buying community, comic, trade paperback, etc. And when you give them the right tools, like you were very apt at Boom, putting extra copies for free in the hands of things, those extra copies go to the workers, and the workers move the product.
Yeah, we sell.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we sell what we love. And when you have a great relationship with someone, you are going to sell a lot of books for that person. That's just the way it is. And anybody wants to disagree with me, that's fine. But I can take my numbers with Boom. When I was at retail and tell you, we sold stuff that I never thought we would hit those numbers. But because of the passion of Philip and others, it made us want to sell more books.
Yeah. And yeah, I think it's that combination. And that's been my experience too, right? Stores are a reflection of their owners and their employees, and the stuff that, I used to joke, because again, I'll bring Larry Young up again. He was based out of San Francisco, and for a while his office was in the Isotope Comic Lounge. It was like upstairs, and guess what the Isotope did? It moved more AIT graphic novels than any other store in the country. And I don't think that's because San Francisco was uniquely positioned or suited to be receptive to the type of material that Larry was publishing, but it was because there was a personal connection there was a passion there that was driving it. And at the same time, I agree with Phantasm Comics in the chat. If your only plan, and this is very common for independent publishers, if your only plan is to show up to the market and say, hey, we've got some creators you recognize, and here is an original concept, therefore there's no brand around the series, and we're a brand new publisher, so there's no brand around Ignition right now. It's literally a word that didn't exist. Ignition Press did not exist as a concept, a couple weeks ago in the public eye. So publishers show up and they come to retailers like Dennis, like Jesse, like the folks in the chat, and say, hey, here's some creators you recognize. I've basically exhausted all of my resources convincing them to do a book for me instead of other people. How many of your Marvel, DC, or Image customers will buy my book instead of their book? Right. And can you please build my brand within your store? Nick, all good stuff. Only good stuff.
Yeah, all good stuff. Hey, there's only good stuff about Nick on here, man. We love Nick Barucci. He's one of the good guys, and we can't say enough positive things about him, so we'll let anybody talk good about him. One of the things that is also that's very. Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to finish that thought and give Phantasm props. I think the other piece of that is you have to arm stores with resources so that when they don't have the time to hand sell your product, that you have posters and shelf talkers and counter dumps and various things in the store that are doing that work for them, or helping close that sale, right?
Yeah.
So,
and I just want to add to just a quick part to that, Brett, before you ask the question. Let me just ask this quick question. Can you tell me why your handshake is very important in your relationships with retailers?
Well, if you don't have integrity, what do you got?
Yeah.
Right. I think that's when we were putting Ignition Press together, one of the things we thought was going to be true was that our individual track records of doing what we said we were going to do, treating people the right way, operating with integrity and respect with, whether it was me with retailers or Jamie with creators, Jeremy with creators, that was going to count for something.
Yep.
And I think it's the only thing you take with you
yep.
as you go from job to job.
Yep.
Yep.
Go ahead,
we've had Filip for a little over 2 hours now, and I just want to say thank you so much for jumping on with us, Filip. And we really hope that this turns into multiple times that you come on this show and talk about comics and what's going on with Ignition. But I have one last question to ask you, and that is talking about brand awareness when it comes to the new media. And we talk about in the world of podcasting and YouTube, how there's a lot of companies out there that just don't pay attention to this part of the tent, pole. An example of that is CGC. We love CGC and what they do, but it's very obvious that they don't really have a PR person that looks at this world.
What's this we?
They can. I think that a lot of us in this world feel like comic companies should have like you were a brand manager. There should be almost like a brand manager for the content world and this type of stuff. What is your thoughts on that?
Well, if I'm understanding the question, Brian, it feels to me like you're saying there's sections of the comics community and the comics industry that are overlooked or ignored or kind of taken for granted by whether it's publishers or creators or, any of the other stakeholders. And I think, the only thing we don't have as a infinitely renewable resource is time, right? So there is a piece of it where, some of it may just be a function of how much time and bandwidth people have. It may not be that a company doesn't want to give time and attention to a particular group of people. They may just be weighing, okay, I've got 5 fires to put out today.
Yeah.
Which 5 am I going to put out?
Yeah.
That being said, I think that, one of the guiding principles we're hoping to employ at Ignition is if we're showing up and trying to engage with a section of the market, we want to make sure that we're adding value to whoever is in that space, right? And I think that's, maybe tying this together with, Jesse, what you were saying about the handshake and about the way that I dealt with retailers is if you take a long-term view and you view things through the lens of relationships as opposed to transactions, then, you're going to, first of all, I think both sides are going to get more out of it over the long term, But when you do misstep, and everybody does, and we certainly did it at Boom, you're going to get a heck of a lot more grace than the person that's viewing it as a transactional relationship, right? And so I think that's, I don't know if that answered the question.
Well,
but I think
what it is, and I should have said it better, is a lot of people that create content or that are that are on Instagram or Twitter and that create this social media and that have a following, we really don't know a lot of what we're talking about when it comes to the industry, right? And we do a lot of rumor-based stuff or taking guesses on how things are done or that type of stuff. And sometimes it feels like maybe a company could have somebody in that group that okay, that's that person to kind of monitor that and say, hey, these guys are talking about us and they don't really understand. I'm going to reach out to them and give them what really is going down or how this really, we're on a delay and this might be the reason. Here's that information.
Right.
Or
hey, Bryan, let me ask it this way. So are you going to be using best practices and common sense solutions to when situations arrive?
Yeah. Well, and communication is, it's in the 10 Commandments there, right? If you're not communicating, then you can't be mad that people are misinterpreting or making assumptions about what your, what the motivations behind your actions are.
Right.
If you're not communicating. So I agree. I think, Bryan, maybe unpacking a little bit more, I think what you're talking about is a fantastic idea. And I think 9 times out of 10, it just comes down to resources, right? And so it's like, and oftentimes companies as businesses have to make the difficult decision of, okay, I'm looking at, what did we agree on, Dennis? 1,250 comic shops, right?
1,200, but yeah.
Or 1,200. Okay, 1,200. I'll shave off the 50. I'm fine with that. So you got 1,200 stores, and I know that this is kind of like the value of those relationships and the ROI that I'm, as a business, that I'm going to get putting energy into those relationships. And I think, one of the challenges about, let's take the YouTube, fan community, I know you guys talk a lot about influencers and experiencers, right?
Yeah.
So this is still nascent, and so it's building. And so part of what you and other folks in your community are doing is you are building a space and creating that value and demonstrating that value. And the more that value gets demonstrated, I think the more kind of late adopters will come in, right? There's always going to be the folks that are, whether it's Nick or Ross, who are plugged into something like that and go, oh, you know what? I see an opportunity here, and I think this is going to turn into something, and I'm gonna engage early on, So yeah, maybe that answers the questions.
Don't get me wrong.
Also,
I don't mind having Filip Sablik come on my show to tell me about what's going on with the Ignition Press, and I will bug the hell out of you to do it more in the future. But I understand that maybe Filip Sablik doesn't have, like you said, the resources and the time to constantly be coming on shows and talking about, okay, this is what's actually going on. I
just want to add to that, Bryan.
Yeah.
One of the other things that'll help answer all these questions is when you get out to vote for me for president of the comic book industry all week long, starting at your comic book shops tomorrow. I have a 7-point plan to ignite and to innovate and to move the needle. We're going to make the comic industry great again with people like Filip right over here.
I was told there would be no politics.
I know.
Yeah,
What do you?
there you go. Yeah.
I'm the only
exactly.
one running. I'm the only one running, so it's technically not politics.
Okay, so we know you're gonna win. So
Right.
congratulations. Yeah. Well, listen, Jesse, you got anything that you want to hit on before we let Philip get out of here?
You know what's great about Philip is these were all my questions tonight. I don't know if you can see that list there, but he answered every single one. Half of them he answered before I could even ask them. I have known Philip for a long time. I will tell you, I want to leave on this, and Philip knows what I'm going to say. The day everything shut down, the first person that called me was Philip and said, "What can I do to help you stay in business?" And I've never forgotten that. My family has never forgotten about that. So to have you on the industry show is beyond what I could ever imagine us at this time, with you going on into this next great direction with a great company and a great team. So it's been always a pleasure and honor talking to you.
Oh yeah,
I got you, buddy.
And I'll just say that I always support my friends. The second you announce this, I'm like, great. I can't wait to support it.
there we go.
Thank you, guys.
Well,
Thank you.
again, and I'm just meeting Philip for the first time, and I can't wait to have you on again, Philip. So thank you so much for joining us, and we're going to be rooting for Ignition Press, and can't wait to hear what's coming around the bend.
Thank you, guys. It's been a ton of fun, and as you can tell, once you wind me up, no problem with me talking. So I'm sure there's at least another 2 or 3 hours worth of nonsense.
What is the web page under? What is the actual web page under that you can follow?
It is not live yet, because again, so again, just one thing that's really interesting is when we announced that we were doing this thing in August, that the four of us were working together, we hadn't planned on announcing it, but people put together that Jamie and I were going off and doing a thing, and we didn't think it was fair to Jeremy and Eric to have to stay quiet while we got the limelight. And the name reveal was really for industry, right, as opposed to hand facing. But that being said, within the next week, I anticipate we'll be live on ignitionpress.com. It's Ignition. The Ignition Press social channels are all active. They're Ignition Press on all of the major channels. You'll notice there's no posts yet, because again, we don't have anything yet that's consumer facing. So this is kind of a soft launch and early, and it's only that I've got so many good friends in the industry that are curious and interested to talk about it that we're even talking about it this early.
Well, hell yeah, man. Good stuff. Well, thank you for hanging out with us so late. We're going to let you go spend the rest of the night with your family, and thank you for coming on. We can't wait to have you come on again.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, see you later.
Right. Later, Philip.
Bye.
Yeah.
Wow. That was pretty freaking awesome.
Yeah. You know what's funny, and I didn't want to bring it up while they were on. When Boom first came out, they came to me and they said, "Jesse, we want to do some exclusives," and we'd never done exclusives before. And I said, "Okay," and it was at Phoenix Con, and so it was 3 books, and I cannot for the life of me remember what those 3 books were. So the 3 books land at the con. They ship it to the store. I open up books. My logos aren't anywhere. And I call them up. I go, "Hey, where are my logos?" I'm like, "For what?" I'm like, "Well, I thought these were my store exclusives." "Well, they are." I'm like, "You have to put the store's exclusive pictures on their logos on." That's how new they were. But it was the fact that they were willing to go out and test stuff and help their community. The things that I Am Boom and all this stuff that they have done to help the next generation. And I guess my point about this is we might be down to 1,250 stores, but we are at the best of the best. If you have made it this 1,250 over the last 5 years, then you're the best of the best. And that's what I see the great future for Ignition. Philip, his team, I think they're going to do a fantastic job because they understand that.
Yeah.
Well,
I agree.
and I absolutely agree with you. And I mean, next week we've got one of Jesse and my oldest, dearest friends coming on here to talk about more pivoting in the comic industry. George Chase from Hypno Comics. And we also have, I don't know if we've announced it yet, but we have our old friend, John Tyler Christopher, coming on.
Yeah,
I'm talking about his amazing home run Grand Slam New York Comic Con variant.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And I just put in the private chat another thing to pull up here to show you how much these guys at Boom, and I want to say this is probably, that might have been Philip's first year there. So this was a book that I said, hey guys, can you make a book for our convention? And I think they sent like one rep out to come, maybe two reps. But they made this, and this was one of the thank you variants. And then it got announced that Michael Keaton bought the rights to it. And I think there's only 100 of these, maybe. Wow. I can't remember. Yeah. But yeah, and they just made that. I don't think they ever charged me for it even.
Yeah, yeah. It's just unbelievable. I mean, you just really look at the story of this guy wanting to be an artist, going to school to be an artist, right?
Yeah.
Learning the telephone system and the fax machines with comic book stores across the nation, jumping over to Top Cow, jumping over to Boom, and now, in his words, doing something on his own and building something with a whole new group of people where he has a lot of personal responsibilities that come with owning a business. So it was awesome. Next week, we've known George forever. He's part of that original group of salespeople that we had brought over into. Oh my gosh, what was the name of our group?
Cobra Comic
Cobra,
Book. Yeah, Comic Book Retailer Association.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, very good guy. Very good guy.
So George will be on with us the second half, and the first half will be John Tyler Christopher, who, like Dennis said, has just recently come off with, to me, this was the best book at the con, in my opinion. How it looked, how John acted with his fans at the con, interacted with his fans at the con, and it's going to be a really great interview to talk about New York Comic Con with him at the same time. So issue 38 next week, right here, same bat time, same bat channel, with the
Don't
same
forget, go out
crew.
and vote. I don't care who you vote for, go out and vote.
Vote for me.
Yep.
Yeah,
and Billy Tucci. Billy Tucci,
my vice president.
Barger 2024 Comic Book President's Awards. All right. That being said, you guys, we'll see you soon. Adios.